Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today, we are super excited to have an MDIBL alum. We're going to take credit for all the amazing work that he's doing. Donald Brooks, or as we refer to him as DJ, and we're really excited to share with you a bit about a project that he's been working on for quite some time, and something that I've always just been fascinated with, that as a pretty young professional, he was able to start this new initiative, which has led to some really exciting work in West Africa. So I think all of you received a bit of background on DJ in the materials that were sent out for the Science Cafe. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time giving you his bio, but just to let you know that our topic this evening is to discuss safe water, access to safe water. So that's obviously, a concern for many areas of the world, but in particular, DJ has put together a group called Initiative EAU, and it's been a very successful project in terms of securing safe drinking water in some of these regions of the world that really struggle with those issues. So we're super excited to hear an update from him on how that project is going. He also is working for the World Health Organization. He's lead data scientist right now on a project for COVID-19 vaccine distribution. So I just told him we're going to have him come back and give us another Science Cafe on that project some other time. But lots of exciting work happening. And as I mentioned at the outset, DJ he spent a summer here at the MDI Biological Laboratory. He had just graduated from John Baptist High School, so he's a native Mainer, and we're super proud of the work that he's doing. So with that, I just want to turn it over. Welcome, DJ. We're so excited to have you with us this evening and looking forward to hearing an update on all the great work that you've been doing. So thanks so much for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you, Jerry. Good evening, everyone. Don't need to introduce myself. Jerry did an excellent job. But yeah, so I was, almost, I was talking to Jerry and Emily right before this. It's almost been 10 years since I was a high school student in between high school and university working at the lab. I saw Susan Fellner connect. Good memories in the scientific presentation class with her. So you'll have to give me feedback, Susan, to see if your teaching's stuck. Yeah, great, Susan. But so let me share my screen so we can get started. Please tell me if you can't see the slides. So like Jerry mentioned, so actually in 2013, the same year that I was a high school student at MDIBL, I co-founded an international NGO called Initiative O being the French word for water, in response to a presentation at my high school, John Baptist in Bangor, by another organization working in water issues, just describing the effects that water scarcity and the lack of clean drinking water that so many regions of the world experience. Wanting to get involved, and I'll come to this actually at the end of this presentation, just a couple of photos from the past of where we started as high school students in Bangor. We've developed it into the current organization that it is, Initiative O. So just a brief roadmap of what I want to chat about today. So about 30 minutes, hopefully, of me talking, and then I would love to have more discussion with you all. But just a brief overview of why water. All of us connected have some connection to Maine through the biolab, and so we're well familiar that Maine has hundreds of freshwater lakes and ponds and streams and rivers. And so for us, this question of access to drinking water may not be as tangible, but certainly is for others. What's happening in our primary focus geography, or the primary country that we work, Burkina Faso in West Africa. It has trickled into headlines in the US of late, not for good reasons, unfortunately, sometimes good reasons, but just to give you an update there and how it's affecting how we're working, and then exactly what it is that we're doing and how we're trying to address the challenges that we've identified. And then again, just an overview of how we got here, a few photos, blast from the past. Great. So like I mentioned, whoops, I skipped a slide. So Initiative O, let me just minimize the camera. Initiative O, we're an American nonprofit, non-governmental organization committed to strengthening water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH, and so I'll refer to it as WASH throughout the presentation, in developing areas, crisis zones, with a specific focus on improving health outcomes. Water, as we'll see in subsequent slides, is multifaceted. Is linked to education, is linked to women's rights, is linked to environment, and we're very much focused at the link between human health and water, sanitation, hygiene. In our style as an entity, we're human-centered but data-driven, and so here we really focus on, and as you'll see in the project spotlights that I'll show at the end, how we use research and what we call action research. Very specific questions that we ask, data that we collect, and how we use that to inform program design, while on the human-centered side, making sure that our programs are adapted to where we're working, but also designed in part by the people that we're working to support. And as mentioned, our primary focus geography is a small country in West Africa called Burkina Faso. We'll get, I'll show some pictures from Burkina, show you guys where it is on a map, because it was definitely a country that I had not heard of back in 2013 or 2009 actually, when we had that first presentation about water issues. So on this question of why water, I think, obviously why water, it's multifaceted, there's lots of different avenues. And I think hopefully in our questions, we can touch also on this question of why water in Maine, because there are, generally in the US, record drought, water quality questions, with changing in industrial processes, etc. And so this question very much is location specific, and there are some similarities, but can look very different based on where it is we're looking. But in any case, at the base, access to safe water and adequate sanitation, so the sanitation hygiene components of WASH, are human rights. And so this was declared by the UN General Assembly, and it's a key, both something I think that is obvious. This is an unalienable right. We all need clean drinking water to live, as a basic human necessity. But having this codified very much as rights by the UN, it allows populations who don't have access to safely managed drinking water to advocate for this right. It's very much a key point to advocacy. Generally, around the globe, 2.2 billion are without safely managed drinking water. And so this is a term that UNICEF and the World Health Organization use to describe essentially, water that's piped into your home, with a water utility that has the necessary checks and balances in place to make sure that drinking water is of safe quality. So this is very different from the number that I think was included actually in the email that went out, the 663 million without access to drinking water, period, or without basic service. And so this is very much kind of that next level of, even if you have access to drinking water, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's clean, that it's safe to drink, and that it doesn't cause disease. And then a similarly large number, 2 billion, are without access to basic sanitation facilities, which is, these two things go hand in hand. So throughout the presentation, I've included quite a few photos because I think they speak, much better than the words that I could use to describe, realities that we are very much unfamiliar with in Maine. So this is a photo from rural Burkina Faso, a city called Bilanga, where we previously did an evaluation of a mapping of all of the different water points, something like this open well, conducted water quality tests, and then used this to help the municipal government inform how they were planning to develop their drinking water infrastructure. And so water access in much of Burkina Faso and much of West Africa generally is like this. There isn't piped water into your homes, or even into nearby homes. There are communal water points like this open well, where people go with buckets, with jerry cans, as shown in the picture, and collect water, and then bring it back to their homes for use, whether it's for cooking, for drinking, for cleaning. any of the wide ranges of uses when we use water daily. This is an example of what we'll call an unimproved water source. Here it's clear that anything can fall into the open mouth of the well, whether that be animal excrements. Actually in the background you can see a few goats, a few sheep, so they can very easily come, defecate in the water, posing public health concerns. But also, simple trash can blow in from the wind. And so this is a type of water point where, actively we're trying to move away from these, to close these, to shock them with chlorine, to at least, make this type of water point usable, but ultimately moving away from, these one-off communal types of water distribution systems in favor of those where it's delivery straight to the home, where we can assure that the water is chlorinated all the way into the home. And so I alluded this, and this is again to this question of why water. I mentioned this in the beginning. So water very much is transversal. It touches everything and everyone. As I mentioned, this is a question of the environment. I think I saw that Jane Disney had connected a lot of the work that you all are doing in Frenchman's Bay, very much is linked to this question of the environment. In places like Burkina Faso, this is also a question of women's rights. It is often women and children who are those that are spending the time to walk often up to 5 kilometers to get drinking water. This is a huge economic burden. It's time that could be spent either going to school if you're a child, or doing revenue generating activities. So this is and so in that way, both women's rights also becomes a question of economic empowerment. And so in this way, water itself, depending on how you interact with it, is very key to breaking cycles of poverty. Safe water, the fact that you don't get sick from drinking the water that you have access to, means that you won't have to take time off again, from revenue generating activities, meaning that you could, you'll have extra revenue, you'll be able to invest in your home, invest in your children's education, so on and so forth. And so this is very much, one of our mantras as Initiative O, and how we see that water essentially as our vehicle of action. Another photo. So this is a woman that I've known now for almost 7 years, Lucy. So she lives in a city in Fara-Ngorma a city in Burkina Faso called Fara-Ngorma. It's the capital of the country's east region. It's also where we have our West Africa regional office. And so this has been Initiative O's home base for essentially the past nearly 10 years, in that we were founded in 2013. And so Lucy, she is a water vendor. And so you'll see behind her, this is another one of the types of water points. Again, it's communal. This faucet behind her serves an entire portion of the city. People will come with jerry cans, collect water here, and they'll pay a small fee to Lucy, both for the maintenance, but also in that she needs to pay the water utility back for the water that she is selling. And so, very much we liked, Lucy is someone who has been engaged in program design. She was one of our key informants for some of the work that we were doing that I'll discuss later, a study that we were doing in the city, looking at how water quality changes across, a small city geographically, how it changes temporally with time, and how it links to, clearly with public health outcomes and disease incidents. She's a lovely person, so we like to highlight. This is one of the people, that people in Burkina Faso would meet, in their daily, their daily activity of collecting water. So generally, now moving a bit more specifically to Burkina Faso, obviously I've been speaking about Burkina, but I'm sure at least a few of you on the call are asking, where is Burkina? So Burkina, again, a small West African country, just north of Ghana and south of Mali and Niger. And it sits in a region of the world just south of the Sahara, known as the Sahel. And so the Sahel is a semi-arid band of land underneath the Sahara. Very limited water rainfall each year, very much localized to 2 or 3 months during what we call the wet season. So it's kind of the double curse of, there is water that falls during these 3 months, but it falls in large quantities, too much for the water table to absorb, in a slow and controlled manner, and results in flooding and other destructive, results. Just to give you a sense of, what this means, semi-arid. So this is a view from a helicopter going from the capital, Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, to Fara-Ngorma. And so this is about this time last year. You can see it's very hazy. You would say smoke, but it's actually dust. During this time of the year, there's a wind that blows in off of the Sahara called the Harmattan. And generally just makes everything that much more dry. The air humidity is very low during this period. And generally, those of us coming from Maine, very much a different landscape than we are familiar with. And so Burkina's, unfortunately, like I mentioned, has been in the news quite often of late. Since 2012, the Sahel has been the location of one of the fastest growing militant theaters for the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, following the fall of Libya in 2012. Burkina more or less was spared from this, from these forces that very much have been working in Mali and Niger to the north for quite a while. But in 2018, we saw a strong uptick in the number of attacks, the geographic spread of the attacks in Burkina Faso, and the impact that has had on the population. Just a brief overview of the situation. So this violent extremist activity has resulted in nearly 1.85 million people fleeing their homes from across the country. And you can see that this displacement in the map is localized very much to the northern regions, bordering directly Mali and Niger, the hubs of these violent extremist groups, but also the east. And so the east is the largest region in Burkina administratively, and it's also our focus region. And so, this degradation very much, has affected us and how we interact, and implement programs, because we've had to shift from, very much a development mentality where our primary interlocutor is the government, working to strengthen, municipal services like drinking water, like sanitation, working with local community groups, to partially a humanitarian actor, where due to the Geneva Conventions and other international humanitarian law, we have to be neutral as a non-governmental entity, not taking a side in either party of the conflict. Which has meant distancing ourselves in certain projects from close contributor or close collaborators like the government, like municipal authorities in the past. So this has been a transition that's fundamentally affected how we've operated, but also other NGOs similar to us. And then just a figure, so Fara-Ngorma is typically a city of about 45,000 people, 50,000 as of the last census. It was historically the fourth largest city in Burkina. And we've seen an increase of about 80,000 people fleeing conflict in the eastern region, moving to the city of Fara-Ngorma, the commune more broadly, which has necessarily impacted the ability of the city and municipal authorities to provide clean drinking water services, provide healthcare services, among other things. So a huge impact just on that alone. In the type of violent extremism that we see in Burkina Faso, symbols of the government are those that are directly attacked by violent extremist actors. So one would think that health centers would be spared. However, this is not the case, and there have been documented attacks on health centers. And generally, the encroaching insecurity has resulted in 185 health centers closing, obviously leaving those served by these health centers without access to basic health services. And 354 more, as of the latest reporting date at the end of April, were operating with reduced services, affecting 2.05 million people. Similarly, education, symbol of the state. Over 4,000 schools have been closed, affecting over 500,000 students. And then on top of this, food insecurity, with one province in the north in a quote unquote emergency phase and 9 others in crisis. One other thing that I thought I would point out as well is one thing that we've seen very much as of beginning of this year, end of last year, is a new tactic used by these violent extremist groups where they are targeting water infrastructure. Again, water infrastructure, it's a basic human right, something that we all need access to. But it's increasingly being used as a piece in this geopolitical game, essentially. And so we've seen direct hits on water points and water trucks that are temporarily bringing in water to displaced populations, purposeful contamination of water resources, and sabotaging of public water networks generators, so the power supply that makes the water system possible. This has been mostly localized to the northern regions of the country, so this is something that we see less in the east, but nevertheless very much a concerning trend. And so in light of all of this, wanted to give an overview of how we're responding. This is a complex situation, context, both from the security standpoint and from a generally from a development standpoint in terms of basal level of access to services. And like I mentioned, so we're very much data driven. We want to make sure that all of our work is based in action research. And so we'll see here that all of the work that I'll present starts with typically with a quick study, and then proceeds to program design with people like Lucy, so that the programs that we're then implementing are adapted to where it is we're working. And so the first project I wanted to quickly spotlight is one of our largest undertakings today, and it's actually one of the biggest pieces that formed how we've developed in terms of foci of late. And it takes place in Fata Ngorma. Again, this is where we have our West Africa regional office. This is very much our hub and the site of a lot of our work. And so we, through support of the Fulbright program by the US Department of State, conducted an action research study looking at how we could support, A, better understand, but B, support urban drinking water service planning in Fata Ngorma using water and health data. Fata Ngorma, 50,000 people, a regional capital, very much a satellite city. It's not a large city like Boston, like Washington, or the equivalent in Burkina, Ouagadougou, the capital, where significant external resources have been pouring for a long time. Very much a smaller city that doesn't see the same level of investment as larger cities. And so in this context, we wanted to see generally, what is the state of water infrastructure now? How does it look in terms of water quality and in terms of functionality? How does this change over a study period? And so we had a study period of 9 months. And then based on this data, is there anything we can glean that could be beneficial and useful to the municipal authorities charged with doing this type of work? Selfishly, we were also able to look to see, where are there gaps in this whole process in drinking water service provision that we can potentially, fill in the interim while municipal authorities are being strengthened to do this on their own. And so here, just in terms of principal activities, we mapped all of these individual communal water points that I was showing earlier across the city, characterize them based on what type of infrastructure they are. There's a huge variance. There's open wells like the photo of the girls who are using in a bucket to pull water from an open well. There are hand pumps. I think that's often what people think of when they think of water-related development work in West Africa. But there are also faucets connected to the municipal water system in the city, like that Lucy was monitoring and managing. We then took a random sample of these over 300 water points across the city, monitored them for a handful of different water quality parameters, looking at both microbiological and chemical contaminants, looking generally at things like E. coli and total coliforms, indicators of general risk to public health, as well looking at turbidity, pH, nitrate concentration, and a few others to get an idea of what is the water quality and how is it changing. And then, as I mentioned, worked with municipal authorities who were benefiting at the time of this study from a large investment from the Belgian government, upwards of several $1,000,000 to revamp and extend the municipal water system in the city. So it was very much a confluence of different activities happening at the same time. So just to give you an overview, so this is a screenshot of Fara Ngorma, again, the regional capital of the East, where we have our office. Our office is right here. And this is an overlay of the different administrative divisions of the city, the different sectors. And then overlaid again, here we have the different kinds of water points. So Susan, I apologize, I didn't include the key here, but there it's not as important. But so each color represents a different kind of water point. Blue could be, a water point like Lucy's. Orange could be an open well like that which the girls were taking water from. But you can see it's, very varied. And so each of these different water points comes with different upkeep, different maintenance, different governance structures behind it, which leads to generally a difficult time for municipal authorities to standardize upkeep and maintenance and making sure that the water being conveyed by these water points is safe. And so from our work, there were a number of key findings from this study, but two of which we used then to inform our activities. One, we saw significant rates of non-performance, whether it's completely, the water point was completely broken on the day of survey, or if it was just temporarily broken. So we saw significant rates of this kind of quote unquote non-performance in manual hand pumps. Manual hand pumps are closed water points, so it means that the water source is protected from contamination. So to see, significant non-performance in this kind of gold standard of communal water point at the time was concerning. And so based on this, we did a little digging. We noticed that this was actually not from a question of, the subterranean water sources being depleted, and was more an issue of the functional upkeep, kind of the social engineering related to making sure that the water pump was appropriately greased, that people were paying their dues, so that in the event of a breakdown, there was money in the shared coffer to action a repair. And so we made the recommendation that ideally the municipal authorities, but technical partners could support to strengthen local water governance structures. And so each of these water points on the map that I showed previously has a group of people, typically those that live immediately next to these water points, responsible for its upkeep, what are called water point committees. And so the recommendation here is a retraining of these water point committees, which often can be ad hoc and not in line with national standards for water governance. Conduct these trainings, equip them with kind of a startup kit essentially of tools, of a cash box, generally of accounting materials, so that they're able to do this kind of the social engineering component of keeping water flowing. And so this is a project actually that I won't talk about, but this was something that we actioned the year after the study with good results. We saw actually 1 year following implementing this recommendation, doing this training, doing this handover of essential materials, we saw that all of the water points were still working. And then the second highlight or key finding that I'd like to highlight is a clustering of E. coli noncompliance. So water points from which we detected E. coli presence, but we also saw a clustering of of a specific type of water point. Actually, the water point that the girls were using in the photo from earlier, which is more prone to E. coli contamination in that it's open to the environment. And so that recommendation here was, in the short term, protect and equip these wells. So essentially shock them with chlorine, seal them, and equip them with a hand pump so that they're closed, and things like animal excrement or trash can't fall in. But also at the same time, then work with this project and other actors investing in water infrastructure in the city to target these areas with quote unquote improved water infrastructure like hand pumps. Next, I'll speak just quickly about another project. And so this is an example of what I was mentioning. So here, we identified this area of the city as one needing additional access to improve water sources. And so here, this is an example of how we directly acted on our recommendations. So we noticed that there was one of these quote unquote non-functional water points in this area. Here, this hand pump in particular wasn't working. We worked with local mechanics to do a diagnostic of the water point, determine what wasn't working, repair it. Again, working to support the social engineering around the water point to make sure that in the event it falls into disrepair again, there are trained individuals with appropriate funding available from the water point users to make that repair. And so this is something that we completed just at the beginning of last year. Now serving both individuals who already lived in this area of Fata Ngorma, but especially now those in part those 80,000 individuals, part of those 80,000 individuals that have fled violence in the eastern region. Another piece. So again, at the beginning, I mentioned that our focus has very much been the interface between water and health. So water quality necessarily was one of those key links between the two. However, of late, we've also moved into a relatively new area for us, a new linkage between these two areas, in light of, in specific, of the COVID-19 pandemic, but which is WASH in health centers, or water sanitation hygiene access in health centers, given the role that clean water access and sufficient water quantities play in maintaining basic environmental hygiene to prevent nosocomial infections, and generally a good quality of service in the health centers. And so here you'll see a map of 6 public health centers across Fata Ngorma, right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in light of the large population of internally displaced persons that live in Fata Ngorma, we wanted to understand what is the current situation in terms of water sanitation hygiene in these health centers, given that at the time, without effective vaccine, hand washing, physical distancing, and other key public health measures were the only tools that we had to prevent the spread of the virus. And so obviously for hand washing, water access, sufficient sanitation infrastructure, and generally standard operating procedures for environmental hygiene management were key to making sure that these health centers did not themselves become nodes of transmission. And so in light of this, we did this assessment, conducted structured interviews with each of the directors, analyzed for gaps, using sector best practices for these kinds of assessments, prepared a diagnostic report to analyze this data, make key, draw key insights and make relevant recommendations to health authorities. This we then published both to other actors in the water sanitation hygiene space in Burkina Faso in the event that one of them was able to quickly respond, but also on our end worked to prepare a concept note for a project addressing these gaps, and it's a project that we're actively implementing now. And so from this study, we identified a few key findings. Again, very specific, to the health centers that we surveyed. It was only 6, and so we're not. The goal was not to make general, recommendations for this region or this chunk of Burkina Faso, but very much for these individual health centers themselves. But we noticed access to and storage of sufficient water was a problem, even for these health centers, or CSPSs as they're called in Burkina Faso, in the middle of a regionally important city. 2 of the most frequented, Urban 1 and Urban 2 at the city center, did not have storage capacity, and with frequent water cuts, this is critical to ensuring the regular flow of water. We identified as well shortcomings in, and again, the social engineering component of making sure that this water infrastructure works, that there's upkeep behind it, that there is financing available to break it or to fix it when it breaks, and generally just to make sure that environmental hygiene, which is so important in healthcare settings, is upheld and maintained, again, with an eye on preventing nosocomial infections. So shortcomings in this in the social engineering aspect, but also as well in the material aspect. And so most often, development programs will focus very much on these material gaps. It's easy to give, brooms or gloves or, the pieces of equipment that are missing. It's much harder, obviously, to work on this, on the management aspect of these questions. And so that's very much, why we're there, what we're working on, what we focus on, because it's focusing on these pieces that will ensure that, the work that we're doing is sustainable and not just a one-off donation of gloves or, or whatever it may be. And so similar work, not the exact project that, not this exact assessment that I was just speaking about, but we did a similar assessment in a different city, a city called Tenkodogo, similar size to Fadana-Gorma, similar issues identified in the health centers. And so we use this action research directly then to inform a response project in that we had a funder who was interested in funding our work. And so here we had identified very similar key findings as previously presented, issues of access to and storage of clean water, a lack of a standard operating procedure for environmental hygiene and regular cleaning of the health center, and generally an unfamiliarity with upkeep and maintenance of water and sanitation infrastructure, as well as the health center kits aspect, which is kind of that one-off material donation. And so with this project, we installed the water storage tank visible here. We installed a new water point. A borehole is what we call a hand pump in a couple of different villages near the city of Tenkodogo to support the health centers there. And then worked very much again with municipal structures to train the local community groups responsible for upkeep within the health centers themselves, but also generally in the community surrounding the health centers to benefit as well the communal water points that are near the health centers. I'm running up on the 30 minutes that I gave myself, but just wanted to quickly mention and show a few photos, a few blasts from my past. So here, this is a photo in front of John Bapps. Anyone familiar with Broadway in Bangor will recognize this facade. I'm here in the front with my co-founder Christina Long, and this is an event that we had organized for this other group, the Barca Foundation, that's working on similar questions from a slightly different angle. And it was really from this event that we got motivated, we got activated, however you want to say it, on supporting this question of water and public health. We organized, and this developed into a series of 5K road races that we held annually in Bangor for about 5 years in North Massachusetts to support the work of this local NGO in Burkina Faso. And this is one that we held in Bangor. We'll skip that video in that we're out of time. And then last one. So this is a photo actually from someplace in Jax on the island in 2013. I don't remember where it was or why we were there, but this is us signing Initiative O into existence. These are our articles of incorporation, signed in 2013 on the island. While I was a high school student at MDIBL. So even if it was just by chance that I was there when we decided to pull the trigger and do it, I very much do credit the community support engagement that I experienced while at MDIBL for encouraging myself and my co-founder to do something like this, because it very much was outside of our comfort zone and something we weren't familiar with. And it's been something that has developed into a long passion. So that's it from me, a quick photo of what our team looks like now. But happy to open the floor to discussion, and I'll hand it over to you, Jerry, to monitor or to moderate, excuse me.
DJ, that was fantastic. I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on thinking of myself as an 18-year-old and what you were able to accomplish is amazing. And I love the fact that it's still such a vibrant program today, you know, that you've really turned that into something that is doing so much good. It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing it with us. We do have a few questions in the chat, and I want to just run those by you. The first one is a question about Lucy. Just curious how she connected with you. Was she sort of open to that relationship, and did she welcome it, or did she see it as competition?
Yeah, so not so much, not at all competition-wise, because we're working in support of individuals engaged with water service provision from the municipal side. In any case, Lucy, we were doing this diagnostic, and she was there. She was the person we were administering the questionnaire to and asking her, about the water point, about how she engages with the public water utility, because Lucy very much, she represents kind of the first person that people will engage with in this long chain of people involved in getting water from a dam, about 50 miles north of the city of Fata, all the way down to this, into this faucet. So she was, happy to engage with us, and at this point, in that she's continued to engage with us now for about 7 years. I would say that she's welcomed our engagement, even if it's very much just kind of an indirect support, working to support the structures that support her, if that makes sense.
That's fantastic. So I just want to encourage those of you in the audience, if you have a question for DJ, just feel free to turn your camera on, use the raise hand feature. I think we're a small enough group, we probably can make that work. So feel free to do that. There are a couple of other questions here too. Did your town officials welcome or work with you? Did they want US donations? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so working with the municipality, with the government of Fata Ngorma has been very, very fluid. We immediately, in that it's a former French colony, and it has many of the same administrative structures and procedures in place as does France, which is very hierarchical. So coming from the US, US governance is more decentralized, is essentially the opposite of the French system of governance, or the Francophone, I should say, system of governance. So as soon as, it took us a while to figure out, how different it was from local engagement in the US. And as soon as you made that connection and you connected in the right way with the right people, our support was very much welcomed. Just because Burkina Faso generally is not a country many Anglophones in particular have heard of. So it doesn't benefit like Ghana or like Nigeria or Kenya, which are much more commonly mentioned in the US media at the very least. And so they very much welcomed this additional support. And in that we were working so closely with local intermediaries and local groups, with a focus on strengthening local capacity, it has made our integration with the community very, very strong. And the vast majority, I'm the only expatriate staff at this point. The rest are all Burkinabe nationals from Burkina Faso, working not necessarily from the community, not from Fata Ngorma, for instance, but from Burkina Faso. In that way, it's not parachute development work, as has been the norm for quite a while.
And you mentioned that you are working with a lot of other groups that are, in the area. Are there any that are particularly, have been really helpful in kind of moving your mission forward? Any relationships that really helped that happen?
Yeah, so there's one municipal entity in particular that not all cities in Burkina Faso have one. It's called the Public Communal Establishment for Development. And they're the technical agency of the mayor's office of Fata Ngorma, responsible for upkeep and maintenance of water infrastructure, among other things. And the fact that Fata Ngorma has the structure, has dedicated individuals working towards the same goal. It's been very much a complementary working relationship that has been fruitful for project outcomes.
That's fantastic. That's great. Let's see. So Jane Disney says, this is so amazing. I hope some of the high school students working with us this year also go on to do such meaningful things. I mean, that's one of the things that is so much fun for us, is to be able to see all the amazing ways in which, people who spend time here and go elsewhere are changing the world. So really, really exciting to see that. Just a quick question: is Lucy responsible for testing the water? How does that work?
Yeah, so Lucy very much is she's the manager of the water point. So she is there all day essentially, and when people come to collect water, she'll collect payment, open the faucet, distribute the metered amount of water, and then essentially do the bookkeeping behind the scenes to make sure that she's paying the public water utility the right amount, and is taking a small portion for herself as a revenue generating activity for her, but she's not the one who's doing the water quality testing. So our focus has been less kind of the citizen science approach that you all have done with the Frenchman's Bay, and much more at strengthening the central technical agency, this public communal establishment for development, to be able to do so, and to make sure that the governance frameworks are in place to essentially to provide a framework for how this is done. So our focus is very much on we'll do our own water quality test too, in kind of this action research phase, but our focus is strengthening the municipal water utilities and authorities who are charged already with this responsibility, who may not be doing it because they're not able, they don't have the right training, materials, whatever it may be, or because the framework isn't set up in a way that this kind of operational water quality monitoring isn't happening.
Mm-hmm. So DJ, you mentioned, some of the challenges that Burkina Faso is facing right now. I mean, how do you see this moving forward? I realize it's a hard question, but I'm just curious, what are some of the immediate challenges that Initiative O is facing, and where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah, so it's changed considerably since 2013 when we founded the organization. So I was working full time on Initiative O from 2017 until 2019, when I took a different position. And so now I'm engaging in a volunteer capacity. But up until 2018, I was physically in Fada Gorma, working with our team, overseeing our work, and ultimately deciding how we were developing. Mm-hmm. Given the severe degradation that we saw in the security situation in 2018, we had to evacuate the Western expatriate colleagues who were working with us in the office, including myself, given the risk of kidnapping, in that ransom is an important stream of revenue for these violent extremist groups. So that already, had imposed and kind of forced, a growth and maturation of the organization, where, honestly, frankly, as the founder, Initiative O is my baby. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of forced, that let go, that step back that needs to happen for any organization to be able to get to that next step, and ultimately, have a life without me or without my co-founder, but something that becomes self-sustaining and self-generating as an institution rather than as a startup or as a one-person led piece of work. And this was only compounded in COVID-19. Where everyone was working remotely. So luckily we had already shifted very much to a managerial system that was partially remote, because we weren't in Fada Gorma anymore, but also helped us, as I think has been the case across the development humanitarian space in the context of COVID-19, when borders closed, flights stopped, the reliance on external experts, quote unquote, or technical assistance, to fly into a disaster site, that wasn't possible. So it's really shifted the mentality more towards making sure that, as it naturally should be the case, that the people in the communities affected by conflict, by natural disasters, by poor water quality themselves are equipped both with the right training, with the right materials, to action, and to work to implement some of the objectives that we've identified, but that are, also the shared objectives with municipal authorities.
Wow, yeah, big changes.
exactly. Yeah, no, no, it's been a ride.
Yeah, I bet it has. Tell us a little bit about the funding stream. How is this initiative funded?
Yeah, so our funding streams are, I think, pretty typical for a small, we very much are a small American nonprofit. And I think funding streams are similar to a lot of small nonprofits. So we rely on public donations from interested individuals who are interested in our mission, and our vision speaks to them. We also rely quite a lot on foundation funding from private family foundations. We also work with much larger bilateral donor agencies like USAID and UNICEF from the bilateral multilateral system, through grants, through contracts for some of the work that we do. So it's very much varied between these three main sources of funding for us.
That's great. What's your annual budget? Are you? I'm just trying to get a sense of scale.
Yeah. It has changed. So at the peak, we were just over 100K, and so we were very small. We've come down a tiny bit, where we pulled back and waiting to see how the security situation has been unfolding. But really, the fact that we're focusing on, it's been a decision from our board to very much opt to work and hire people in the positions that may go to people working from the US or from elsewhere to Burkina Faso nationals, has been one of our key ways of making sure that not only is project work sustainable, but also makes the funding of the institution more sustainable. In that a US based salary is much larger as adjusted to cost of living, and it just explodes project budgets.
Amazing. So walk us through this process just a little bit. Here you are, a new graduate from high school, and you have this idea. So you kind of form this nonprofit. What did that process look like as you went through college, and you continued to think about this and want to move forward? How did you? I mean, I'm just blown away by the fact that you could just sort of have this idea and decide, okay, we're gonna do something in West Africa. Run that with us a little bit.
Yeah. So it did get started. Kind of the idea came, mid high school with the presentation from this group, and they're continuing to do work. Their focus, however, is a bit more on the water education and water agriculture links. So slightly different than the water public health focus that we wanted to have. I can't give a good answer as to why we decided that this was going to be what we were interested in, but I think it's kind of the momentum aspect of you do one thing, and then you kind of have you have the group, you have the working rhythm between my co-founder and I at the time, and then ultimately as our team got bigger with others, where we just started saying we see these problems, let's try and figure out how to fix them. And this has been something that's very much grown with me over time. And so it started very, very small, an operating budget of 5,000 max, and then through high school it's developed with me, and so some of my interests, I took some courses in undergraduate, so I was at Harvard, but cross-registered and took a few courses more on the water engineering side at MIT with a lifelong mentor now, Susan Murcat at MIT, who has done significant work in Ghana. Similar problems facing Ghanaian water infrastructure as in Burkina. And so experiences like that have fundamentally changed how we've developed. She helped influence and advise on ultimately how the study was designed. That was the Fulbright funded project afterwards. So it's very much been something that has ebbed and flowed, but has kind of worked to find the niche, find the gaps that are there, and try and fill them in a way that that works and that is sustainable.
DJ, this is such a powerful example, I think, to young people, and in terms of the fact that they can have an impact. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming. You see all the problems in the world and feels a little bit like there's nothing, that you can do. I mean, it's a powerful example to all of us, I should say, but particularly to young people. And I think we need to tell this story. It's such a great one. So I'm so excited and so honored that you chose to share it with us. It's really wonderful, and really appreciate your time halfway across the world to do this. So thank you for being with us. It's so exciting. Any final questions for DJ before we make a couple closing announcements? Just open that up if anybody had a burning question. Thank you again so much. So proud of all the work that you're doing, and it's going to be fun we'll have you back and hear how things are going. But also we do want to hear a little bit about your work with the World Health Organization at some point. I think that's fascinating as well. So
Definitely.
best of luck.
No, thank you.
Right.
Thank you for the opportunity. I was
Wonderful
very
to
happy
see you.
to come back and speak with you all.
Well, it's great to have you.